everybody. Welcome to Verse by Verse Bible Teaching. My name's Chris.
And I am Mike.
And today we're going to be finishing the first chapter in the book of Titus. There's 3 chapters in the book of Titus. And we started off, I think we ended last time with verse 9. So maybe we should get a running start and pick up verse 9 and just discuss it real quickly as we go into verse 10.
Mm-hmm. I think that sounds like a very good idea. So Paul here is, he's been talking about a bunch of different stuff, so we'll just jump into here, verse 9, real quickly. He must hold firm to the trustworthy word as taught, so that he may be able to give instruction in sound doctrine and also to rebuke those who contradict it. So this idea to hold firm to a trustworthy word as taught, it's bringing us back to the fundamentals of Christianity. Paul is saying here, stand on the unchanging Word of God. Hold on to it tenaciously. And he's also linking it to the teaching that they got, perhaps from Paul himself, almost from somebody in his inner circle like Titus. It's interesting to zoom out and look at this in the context of today, and that we are to be a link to what Paul taught as believers and to what others who have come before us have taught. We should really know, what everybody who has sound doctrine is teaching, and where doctrines come from. And above all, through it all, we really need to know the Bible. That's the thing we need to know above all things. And that's really sort of in view here in verse 9. Chris?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that. I mean, that's the backdrop of the whole rest of this chapter. Holding fast the faithful word as he has been taught. And keep in mind, he's just got done telling Titus, who's at Crete in this troubled situation. We're going to find out more about that here in just a bit. A really kind of messed up church, or at least a messed up background. And, he's given Titus his instructions for, what kind of people to get into the positions of pastor and things like that. And he has just now shifted gears, and he said these people need to be holding fast the faithful word as he has been taught, that he may be able, by sound doctrine, to both exhort and to convince the gainsayers. So, like you said, fundamentals, holding fast to the faithful word, just amazingly important there about our own lives. Holding fast to the faithful word, is that something that we're doing in our lives? Is that something we're striving to do? If we're not right now, it's something that you can pray for if you're not, just to have the thirst for the word and things like that. But it's also interesting at the very end of this, he says, one of the reasons we need to do that is so we can exhort and to convince the gainsayers, which in this context are going to be these false teachers that we're going to now start to talk about as we move into verse 10. Mike?
Yep. Titus chapter 1, verse 10. For there are many who are insubordinate, empty talkers, and deceivers, especially those of the circumcision party. So we now see Paul shifting gears here a little bit and beginning to talk about a faction that we presumably talked about in Galatians in our previous study. Paul is now juxtaposing those who are of the circumcision party with those he has revealed, with what he has revealed about elders and overseers, Whereas the elders and overseers are hospitable, the circumcision party is dark spiritually and dark in their relation to other people. Where the elders of the true gospel are to be above reproach, those of the circumcision party are slanderers and backbiters. Whereas the bondservants of the true gospel teach salvation, the circumcision party teaches that Jesus is only quote-unquote part of the way. It's also interesting to note that Paul in this verse begins to talk about false teachers in general, but then goes on to zero in on those of the circumcision party in particular, as if those are in fact the worst offenders. And I would submit they are. Chris?
I think there's something to that, and we'll get into that a little bit later as he gets more in depth in that. But yeah, I think there's something interesting as we see Galatians is talking about it here in Titus, even in the Colossians heresy, which was sort of New Agey and Gnostic. You hear Paul talking, rebuking them for their keepings of, the Jewish feasts and the Sabbaths and the foods that they were eating. He was still talking about the very same thing there. So it is something that we'll talk a little bit about in just a little bit. So he says, for there are many unruly or insubordinate and vain talkers and deceivers, especially they of the circumcision. So the word insubordinate there indicates someone who will not submit to authority. That's basically what it means. In fact, the Greek word is like the negative form of the word submit. So insubordinate. They won't submit. They're just not willing to submit. Guzik says God has established an order of authority in several different areas of life. There is an order of authority in the home, in the church, in the workplace, and in the community. God wants us to recognize the place where he has a place of order of authority in our lives, and he wants us to submit to that authority. And I just wanted, as a side note, to say about Guzik in this particular area, he does some really interesting sermons on this on Ephesians 5, where the book of Ephesians talks a lot about the different types of authority in the home, in the church, in the workplace, in the community, and specifically it's a marriage thing. There's a 5-part series he does on marriage, but in that you get a lot of that very detailed study that David Guzik does on that particular issue. Okay, you said, let's see. From this, you can also tell that there were Jews in Crete at the time, obviously, because they were there to be Judaizing the church. So there's suggests that they were there. There's actually some debate about it, and some really good archaeological evidence as well. Keep in mind the Jewish people had spread out quite a bit at that time as well. The idea that there were many unruly or vain talkers. Sometimes that word vain there is translated as sort of senseless or mischievous. Some translations say idle, but I feel like that's not really the way we think of idle, but it's sort of mischievous is, I guess, a way to think of it. And Barclay says the last sentence suggests that Paul, to speak of the Cretan errorists, the allusions to the false teachers, show that this letter belongs to the closing years of the apostle's life. And quite honestly, I don't know what he's talking about there. Do you have any idea what that could mean?
Golly gee willikers.
I don't know. But anyway, that's what Barclay said. So these people were not submitting to any authority. They were mischievous in their talking and teaching. And like I said, I'll talk a little bit about false teachers of this particular kind a little later, because he says, these are of the circumcision. But, you can really tell from Paul's tone, especially as we start this next verse, that this was something that was very frustrating to him. And you could just feel his emotion in these next few verses. And with this particular type of false teaching, the legalistic false teaching, especially that is saying that we need certain types of the Jewish element in order to be saved, that we need Jesus plus the law, it can be very, very frustrating, and you can really tell in verse 11. Right?
All right. Good stuff. I was thinking about what you said about how why he thought that maybe all this stuff was from the end of his life. And it occurred to me that in Paul's last address to the people of Ephesus, he said, I've been with you, I've done this and I've done that. After I leave, false teachers are going to come.
Maybe so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that was presumably the last time he spoke in person to the church elders of Ephesus. So there's a possible tie in there. I'd have to really know more about Barclay to be able to discern what on earth he was talking about. Anyway, Titus chapter 1, verse 11. They must be silent, since they are upsetting whole families by teaching for shameful gain what they ought not to teach. They must be silent. Paul here speaks about the circumcision party, telling Titus that he needs to stop the circumcision party. Of particular note, Paul uses the word epistomizo, which carries with it the connotation. I thought this was interesting. The connotation of putting a mouthpiece on something, as of a flute or especially of a horse. Apparently, the circumcision party was active in Crete and was gaining followers. This is a little like some of the hyper-Calvinists today. It's sort of sad to really hear about this, actually, but talk to some pastor friends. They let me in on this. These hyper-Calvinists, they believe that they don't have to go to evangelize anybody. And groups of them are now going into Bible studies of other churches and are teaching hyper-Calvinistic perspectives to people who are already going to church as a way to bring people away from their current church and into a hyper-Calvinistic setting. So they're actually going around through Bible studies to try and pull people away from the church that they're going to. So this type of behavior is very typical of people who are sort of cultish. They sneak into organizations with motives other than wanting to be part of a fellowship of believers and begin to teach stuff that's not true, always wrapping it as a quote-unquote deeper truth than what is currently being taught. And that's really, in today's day and age, that really should be something that people could use as a bellwether, a weather vane on Bible teaching. If somebody's saying, well, man, I have something new here that's like totally deep, you should probably be a little bit wary of that.
New truth.
Anyway, yeah, this is very typical. That whole sort of thing is very typical of someone who is teaching just flat out heresy,
Mm-hmm.
For someone who is teaching something for shameful gain.
Yeah, that's actually
teaching something how not to teach.
That same thing. It was a hyper-Calvinism type thing. Had exactly that same situation, exactly that same way. Sort of wanted to be around, the studies and everything. That was exactly their expressed, purpose. We found out later, to actually get people into this idea, and it's different than, I'm sympathetic to certain aspects of, obviously Calvin himself, but this was much, much different. But anyway, the other thing about that too is that at the end it says in the King James, for filthy lucre's sake. Were you done with your commentary, by the way?
Yeah, all done.
Okay. And where it starts out, whose mouths must be stopped, who subvert whole houses, teaching things which they ought not for filthy lucre's sake. Man, it's just really, really heavy. Whose mouths must be stopped because they're subverting whole houses. And you think about it, that's whether they were pastors, and obviously a lot of the pastors they were meeting in houses. They were, these charismatic types that were going in and picking off the weak among their fellowship, which is how they tend to operate. It's always those young in the Lord that end up, or not necessarily that they aren't that experienced. There could be other things. Maybe they just weren't, reading the Bible or whatever it may be. It's the weak that they ended up picking out of that situation. Actually, I think those particular guys didn't end up getting anybody, but anyway, so